The stranger collapsed at the edge of Prescott Harwell's field, just as the first snow began to fall. And when he rushed over with his lantern held high, he found not a human traveler but an orc woman bleeding into the frozen earth. Her green skin had gone pale from blood loss, her leather armor torn and soaked through with crimson. Prescott knelt beside her, his breath misting in the cold air as his hands hovered uncertainly over her wounds. 10 years ago, he had been a soldier on the border, had fought orcs in brutal skirmishes that left nightmares etched into his sleep. But that life felt distant now, belonging to a younger man who had not yet learned that survival often meant leaving violence behind. "Easy now," he murmured, sliding his arms beneath her shoulders and knees. She was heavy with muscle and armor, and his back protested as he lifted her, but he managed to carry her toward his small farmhouse. Snow swirled around them, settling on her dark hair and his worn coat. Inside, he laid her on his bed, the only bed in his modest home, and quickly stoked the fire until warmth filled the room. Her breathing came shallow and rapid. 3 deep gashes ran across her side, and a wound in her thigh leaked steadily. Prescott had sewn up injuries before, on himself and on fellow soldiers, so his hands moved with practiced efficiency as he heated water, tore clean cloth into strips, and threaded a needle. She woke once while he worked, her yellow eyes unfocused and wild with fever. She spoke words in the orcish tongue that he did not understand, her voice rough and urgent. He pressed a cool cloth to her forehead and whispered reassurances until she slipped back into unconsciousness. For 3 days, she drifted between waking and sleeping while Prescott tended her wounds and kept the fire burning. He brought her water and thin broth, supporting her head when she was coherent enough to swallow. On the 4th morning, she opened her eyes with clarity and found him sitting in a chair beside the bed, exhausted and unshaven. "You are human," she said, her voice hoarse but steady. Her accent was thick, each word carefully pronounced. "I am," Prescott replied. "And you are alive, which is what matters." She studied him with an intensity that made him shift in his seat. Her tusks were small and elegant, curving up from her lower jaw, and despite the pallor of illness, there was a fierce beauty to her angular features. "Why did you help me?" "Because you needed help." He stood and ladled broth from the pot hanging over the fire. "Can you sit up? You need to eat properly." With effort, she pushed herself upright, wincing at the pull of her healing wounds. Prescott handed her the bowl and watched as she drank, her hands trembling slightly. When she finished, she set the bowl aside and met his gaze again. "My name is Orenna Greyshield," she said. "I am in your debt, Prescott Harwell, and you are not in my debt. No one owes anyone for basic kindness." Her expression shifted, something complicated passing through her eyes. "You were a soldier." It was not a question. Prescott nodded slowly. "Once, years ago. I am a farmer now. You killed my kind." "I did," he would not lie to her, "and they killed mine. That is what war is. But the war is over for me, has been for a long time." Orenna was silent for a long moment, her gaze dropping to her hands. "I was fleeing my own clan," she said finally. "They wanted me to lead a raid on a human settlement. When I refused, they named me traitor. I barely escaped." Prescott felt something tighten in his chest. "You refused to attack humans. I have seen enough death." Her voice was quiet but firm. "There has to be another way forward. My clan did not agree." Outside, the wind howled and snow piled against the windows. Prescott added another log to the fire. "You can stay here until you heal. After that, you can decide where you want to go." Over the following weeks, as winter deepened its grip on the land, Orenna grew stronger. She began to move around the small farmhouse, at first with Prescott's support, and then on her own. She was taller than him by several inches, her frame powerfully built, and watching her regain her strength was like watching a wild creature remember its nature. She insisted on helping with chores despite his protests. She fed the chickens, hauled water from the well, and chopped firewood with an efficiency that left Prescott slightly in awe. In the evenings, they sat by the fire and talked, their conversations growing longer and easier as the days passed. "You live here alone?" Orenna asked one night as she mended one of his old shirts with surprising skill. "I do. I bought this land with my discharge pay. It is not much, but it is mine." He paused, staring into the flames. "I wanted a quiet life, something simple." "It suits you," she said, and there was warmth in her voice that made his heart skip. "What about you? What did you do before you left your clan?" "I was a warrior, a good one." She set down the mending and flexed her hands. "But I was also a daughter, a sister. I had friends, a place in the world. Now I have none of that." The loneliness in her words was palpable, and Prescott found himself leaning forward. "You have a place here, for as long as you want it." Orenna looked at him then, really looked at him, and the air between them felt charged with something unspoken. "You barely know me. I know you refuse to hurt innocents even when it costs you everything. I know you work hard and complain little. I know you laugh at my terrible jokes about the chickens." He smiled softly. "That is enough for me." A flush darkened her green cheeks, and she turned back to the mending, but he saw the small smile that tugged at her lips. As winter began to loosen its hold, and the first hints of spring appeared, their daily routine became a dance of careful proximity. Prescott found himself hyper-aware of Orenna's presence. The way she hummed orcish songs while cooking, the strength in her hands when she helped him repair the barn roof, the sound of her laughter when he slipped in the mud while checking the field. One evening, as they prepared dinner together in the small kitchen, their hands brushed as they both reached for the same knife. The contact was brief, but it sent a jolt through Prescott's entire body. He pulled back quickly, his cheeks burning. "Sorry," he muttered. Orenna did not move away. Instead, she turned to face him fully, her yellow eyes searching his face. "Prescott," she said softly, and the way she spoke his name made his breath catch. "I need to tell you something." His heart hammered in his chest. "What is it?" "When I first woke in your bed, when I saw you were human, I was afraid. I thought perhaps you had saved me only to sell me or use me as leverage. But you did none of those things." She reached out and gently touched his face, her palm warm against his skin. "You gave me kindness when I had no right to expect it. You gave me a home when I had nowhere to go. You gave me hope when I thought I had lost everything." Prescott covered her hand with his own, holding it against his cheek. "Orenna, let me finish," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Among my people, when someone saves your life, there is a tradition, a life debt that can be repaid only through service or sacrifice. But that is not why I want to stay. I want to stay because when I am with you, I feel seen. I feel valued. I feel like I could build something new, something better than what I left behind." He turned his head and pressed a kiss to her palm, his eyes closing. "I want you to stay, not because of any debt, but because I cannot imagine my life without you in it anymore. You have become essential to me, Orenna, more than I knew how to say." When he opened his eyes, he found her looking at him with an expression of wonder and longing. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned in and kissed her. Her tusks pressed gently against his face, unfamiliar but not unwelcome, and her lips were soft and warm. She made a small sound in the back of her throat and kissed him back with a hunger that matched his own. They broke apart, both breathing hard, and Prescott rested his forehead against hers. "I am in love with you," he whispered. "I think I have been for a while now." "And I with you," Orenna replied, her voice thick with emotion. "My heart is yours, Prescott Harwell." That night they held each other by the fire, wrapped in blankets and contentment. The world outside might have judged them, might have called their love wrong or unnatural, but in the warm safety of the farmhouse, none of that mattered. Spring arrived in full, bringing with it the hard work of planting. Prescott and Orenna worked side by side in the fields, preparing the soil and sowing seeds. She learned quickly, her warrior's discipline translating well to the patience required for farming. In the evenings, they would wash up and cook together, then fall into bed exhausted and happy. It was during one of these ordinary, perfect days that trouble arrived. Prescott was in the barn, repairing a broken plow blade, when he heard voices from the road. He stepped outside to find 3 men on horseback approaching the farmhouse. He recognized them as neighbors from the nearest town, about 5 miles east. Their faces were hard, their postures aggressive. "Harwell," the lead rider called out. His name was Thomas Pryor, and he owned the largest farm in the area. "We need to have a word." Prescott wiped his hands on his trousers and walked toward them slowly. "What can I do for you, Thomas?" "We have heard rumors," Thomas said, his eyes narrowing. "Rumors that you are harboring an orc, that you are living with one." Cold dread settled in Prescott's stomach. "What I do on my own land is my business. Not when it puts the rest of us at risk," another man spoke up. This was Daniel Foster, younger and more hot-headed than Thomas. "Orcs are savages. Everyone knows that. Having one around is asking for trouble." "Orenna is not a threat to anyone," Prescott said, keeping his voice level despite the anger building in his chest. "She is a peaceful woman who wants only to live her life." Thomas leaned forward in his saddle. "People are scared, Harwell. They remember the border wars. They have lost family to orc raids. You expect them to just accept one living among them." "I expect them to judge people by their actions, not their blood," Prescott shot back. "Orenna has done nothing to harm anyone." "Yet," Daniel muttered. Before Prescott could respond, the farmhouse door opened and Orenna stepped out. She wore simple work clothes, her hair tied back, but there was no mistaking what she was. The 3 men tensed, hands moving toward weapons. "Prescott," Orenna said calmly, walking to stand beside him. "Is there a problem?" "These men think you are a danger," Prescott said, his jaw tight. Orenna studied the riders with a steady gaze. "I understand your fear," she said, her accent careful but clear. "I know the history between our peoples, but I am not your enemy. I left my clan because I refuse to continue the cycle of violence. I seek only peace." "Pretty words," Thomas said, "but how do we know you are telling the truth? How do we know this is not some trick?" "Because I give you my word," Orenna replied, lifting her chin. "And because I have no reason to lie. If I wanted to harm humans, I would not be standing here trying to convince you of my intentions." The 3 men exchanged glances. Finally, Thomas spoke again. "We cannot have an orc living this close to town. People will not stand for it. You have 2 choices. Send her away or leave yourself." Prescott felt fury rise hot and bright in his chest. "This is my land. You have no right to make demands." "We have every right to protect our families," Daniel said. "If you will not see reason, we will make you see it." "Is that a threat?" Prescott's hand moved to the knife at his belt. "Stop." Orenna's voice cut through the tension. She put a hand on Prescott's arm, her grip gentle but firm. "This will not be solved with violence." She turned back to the riders. "Give us time. Let us prove that I am not a threat. I will work, I will help, I will show you through my actions that I mean no harm. If after the harvest you still want me gone, I will leave. I give you my oath." Thomas considered this, his expression unreadable. "The harvest," he said finally. "You have until then. But if there is any trouble, any sign that you are not what you claim, we will not wait for explanations. Are we clear?" "Clear," Orenna said. The men rode off, leaving Prescott and Orenna standing in the yard. Prescott turned to her, his hands shaking with residual anger. "You should not have agreed to that. You have done nothing wrong." "I know," she said softly, "but fighting them would only confirm their fears. This way we have a chance to change their minds. And if we cannot," Orenna cupped his face in her hands, "then we will face that when it comes. Together." The summer months were a test of patience and determination. Prescott and Orenna worked their fields, but they also made a point of helping their neighbors. When old widow Martha needed her roof repaired after a storm, Orenna was there with hammer and nails. When the Fosters' well ran dry and needed to be dug deeper, Orenna provided the strength to haul rocks and dig through hard earth. When a child went missing in the woods, Orenna joined the search party and was the one who found the boy, cold and scared but unharmed. Slowly, grudgingly, attitudes began to shift. People still watched Orenna with caution, but the overt hostility faded into wary acceptance. Children who had once hidden behind their parents' legs began to wave at her in the market. Women who had clutched their purses tight when she passed started to nod in greeting. Through it all, Prescott and Orenna's love deepened. They learned each other's rhythms, their preferences and quirks. Prescott discovered that Orenna loved thunderstorms and would stand outside in the rain with her face turned skyward. Orenna learned that Prescott sang tunelessly when he thought no one was listening, and she found it endearing rather than annoying. One night, as they lay tangled together in the darkness, Orenna spoke into the quiet. "My people have a tradition," she said. "When two people wish to bind their lives together, they exchange blades, weapons that have protected them, that they trust with their lives. It is a symbol that they now protect each other." Prescott propped himself up on one elbow, looking down at her. "Are you asking me to marry you? In my way, yes." She smiled, her tusks catching the moonlight filtering through the window. "Though I know human customs are different." "Not that different," he said, his heart full to bursting. "In my culture, one person asks and the other answers, so let me ask properly." He took her hand in his. "Orenna Greyshield, will you marry me? Will you be my wife, my partner, my companion for all the days we have left?" "Yes," she said, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." They kissed then, deep and slow, and made quiet promises to each other in the language of touch and breath. The harvest came, golden and abundant. Prescott and Orenna worked from dawn to dusk, bringing in wheat and vegetables, preparing for winter. On the final day of harvest, as they loaded the last of the crops onto the wagon, Thomas Pryor rode up the lane. Prescott tensed, but Orenna squeezed his hand reassuringly. Thomas dismounted and approached them slowly. He looked older than he had in the spring, the lines around his eyes deeper. "The harvest is done," he said without preamble. "It is," Orenna replied. Thomas was quiet for a long moment, his gaze moving over the farm, the full wagon, the neat fields. "My daughter was the one who got lost in the woods," he said finally. "Rebecca. She is 7 years old, and she is everything to me and my wife." Prescott said nothing, waiting. "You found her when the rest of us had given up hope. You carried her home and would not accept any payment or thanks." Thomas looked at Orenna directly. "You saved her life." "Any decent person would have done the same," Orenna said quietly. "Maybe," Thomas allowed, "but you did do it, and in the month since I have watched you. I have seen you work and help and ask for nothing in return. I have seen the way Harwell looks at you, the way you look at him." He cleared his throat roughly. "I was wrong about you. I let old fears and prejudices blind me to what was in front of my eyes. You are not a monster. You are just a woman trying to build a life, same as any of us." Orenna's eyes widened, and Prescott felt his own throat tighten with emotion. The people in town, they feel the same, Thomas continued. Most of them, anyway. There will always be some who cannot let go of hate, but that is their failing, not yours. What I am trying to say is that you have earned your place here, both of you, and if anyone tries to say otherwise, they will have to go through me first. He extended his hand to Orenna. After a moment's hesitation, she took it, and they shook firmly. "Thank you," she said, her voice rough. "You do not know what this means." "I think I do," Thomas said. He nodded to them both and mounted his horse. "Good harvest, Harwell. I will see you both at the autumn market." As Thomas rode away, Orenna turned to Prescott and buried her face in his shoulder. He held her as she shook with silent tears, not of sadness but of relief and joy and hope. They were married on a cool autumn day, under a sky painted with orange and red leaves. The ceremony was a blend of human and orcish traditions. Orenna wore a simple green dress that matched her skin and complemented her dark hair, which she wore loose and flowing. Prescott wore his best shirt and trousers, his hair neatly combed for once. Thomas Pryor stood as witness, along with Martha and several other neighbors who had come to accept Orenna. There was no priest, so they spoke their vows directly to each other under the open sky. "I vow to stand beside you in all things," Prescott said, his voice clear and strong. "To protect you, to provide for you, to love you until my last breath. You are my heart, Orenna Greyshield, and I am yours. I vow to honor you, to support you, to be your partner in all things," Orenna replied, her accent thick with emotion. "You saw me when others saw only a monster. You gave me a home when I had none. You loved me when I thought I was unlovable. I am yours, Prescott Harwell, in this life and whatever comes after." They exchanged blades as per orcish tradition, Prescott giving her the knife he had carried since his soldier days, and Orenna presenting him with a beautifully crafted dagger that had been her mother's. Then they exchanged rings as per human custom, simple bands of silver that caught the sunlight. When they kissed, the small gathering applauded, and for the first time in 10 years, Prescott felt truly, completely at peace. The celebration was modest but warm. Tables were set up in the yard, laden with food that neighbors had contributed. There was music and dancing, and at one point, Orenna taught the children an orcish game that involved much running and laughter. Prescott watched her, his wife, and marveled at how much had changed since that snowy night when she had collapsed in his field. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Prescott and Orenna stood together at the edge of their land, looking out over the fields they had worked together. "You remember the night we met?" Orenna asked, leaning her head on his shoulder. "Of course." "You were half dead and covered in blood. Not exactly a romantic beginning." She laughed softly. "No, but it was the beginning nonetheless. 10 years ago, when I was still with my clan, I met a human man at a border market. He was young, just a soldier trying to buy bread. He had only 1 coin left, barely enough for himself, but when he saw me watching, hungry and forbidden by my clan from trading with humans, he bought the bread and split it with me. He gave me half of his last meal, knowing I was supposed to be his enemy." Prescott went very still. "That was you." "It was me," she said, turning to face him. "I never forgot that kindness. It planted a seed in my heart, the idea that maybe our peoples did not have to be enemies, that maybe there was another way. When I finally found the courage to leave my clan, I did not know where to go, but something pulled me in this direction. I think some part of me was searching for that soldier, even though I did not know his name or if he even still lived." "My gods," Prescott breathed. "I remember you. I remember thinking how strange it was, how your eyes held no hatred. I thought about that moment for years afterward. We were always meant to find each other again," Orenna said softly. "It just took time." 10 years, Prescott said, pulling her close. 10 years between sharing a piece of bread and standing here as husband and wife. It was worth the wait, she said, and kissed him as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. The years that followed were not without challenges. There were still those who looked at their marriage with disapproval, who muttered that such unions were unnatural. But Prescott and Orenna built a life that proved louder than any prejudice. Their farm prospered. They became pillars of their small community, always ready to help a neighbor in need. In their 3rd year of marriage, Orenna gave birth to a daughter. She was a beautiful blend of both her parents, with her mother's green-tinted skin but her father's softer features, small tusks that would be delicate rather than fierce, and eyes that were a striking amber color. They named her Petra, and she became the absolute center of their world. Watching Orenna hold their newborn daughter, Prescott was overwhelmed by gratitude for the strange path his life had taken. From soldier to farmer, from lonely man to husband and father, every step had led him here. More children followed, 2 sons who were sturdy and curious, with their mother's strength and their father's kindness. The farmhouse that had once felt too big for one man was now always full of noise and laughter and love. On the 10th anniversary of their wedding, Prescott and Orenna stood once again at the edge of their land. Their children were asleep inside, watched over by Martha, who had become like a grandmother to them. The night was clear and cool, reminding Prescott of that first night so many years ago. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. "Leaving your people, binding yourself to a human, all of it." Orenna looked at him as if he had asked whether the sun would rise. "Never. Not for a single moment. You gave me a life worth living, Prescott. You gave me love and family and a place to belong." "How could I ever regret that?" "I gave you nothing," he said, shaking his head. "You gave all of that to yourself. You made the brave choices. You did the hard work. I just loved you, which was the easiest thing I have ever done." "Then we gave each other everything," she said, taking his hand. "And we will continue to do so, for as long as we live." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead, 2 people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful from the ruins of old hatreds. In the distance, a wolf howled, and the wind carried the scent of approaching rain. But inside the farmhouse, warm light glowed in the windows, and their children slept peacefully, unaware that their very existence was a miracle. Prescott pulled Orenna close and kissed her forehead, her tusks a familiar comfort against his face. "I love you," he whispered. "My wife, my partner, my everything." "And I love you," she replied, "always and forever." The rain began to fall, soft and gentle, and they walked back to the house hand in hand, ready to spend another night safe and warm in the life they had built together. Behind them, the fields stretched dark and fertile, ready for the next season's planting, full of potential and promise, just like the future that lay ahead of them.